All right, so our UI is coming together. We're going to add the final piece, which is the button, just the UI of it. Then we're going to refactor. And then in the next video, I'm going to introduce state and how we can switch from night mode to dark mode and change things based on state and pass that state in a binding down to another view. We're going to start dipping our toes in passing data, keeping it very, very simple. But again, it's just the beginning. So let's get to it. All right, so down at the bottom here, again, remember this whole thing is a V-stack, right, on our design. So the last piece of the V-stack, I'm sorry, vertical stack, V, is our button. So after the spacer that goes after our H-stack, which is right here, I'm gonna make some room here, we're gonna create our button. And to do that, it's just button. And button takes in two pieces, right? You have this first kind of closure here, but then there's a second one. You do label, right? So the label, there's a couple different ways to initialize a button. This is what I found is the most common, because this first section here is the action. It's what the button does, right? So we'll do right now, just print tapped. This is where we're going to change from day to night in our UI, but for now, button tapped. Label is what the button looks like, right? And it's kind of different from UIKit, where in UIKit, you're actually customizing the button itself. Well, here you just kind of get the functionality of a button and you can make it look however you like. So for example, our button label is actually going to be a text that says change daytime. You can name it whatever you want. And you can see we got our button down at the bottom. Now, what do you think we're going to put below that button to get it off the bottom of the screen? We don't want it down there, right? We're going to put a spacer down there. So one more spacer. Now, something you need to keep in mind when building spacers on and I'm curious if I'll run into it. No, on all these views is a spacer counts as a view. And one restriction on purpose of Swift UI is that in this whole Z stack, right, in the overall view, you can only have 10 views. As soon as you put in your 11th view, Xcode is going to yell at you and say, you can't do this, right? So if we count ours, we have our gradient background view, cool. We have our V stack, right? Now, nested stuff doesn't count, right? So linear gradient view is 1. Our V stack with our big icon is 2. Our H stack with our days is 3. The spacer's 4, the button is 5, and this last spacer is 6. Okay, so we're well below the 10, no big deal. But something when I was learning Swift UI that I kept running into is, I'll admit my mistakes, right? I was overusing spacer, right? And you could argue I'm even overusing it here too. And I was hitting that like 10 view limit a lot. So something to keep in mind, spacers are great, but you can easily kind of overuse them and kind of run into trouble there. And real quick, the solution to that 10 view limit is to refactor your views, right? Refactor it out into another H stack here, refactor it out into its own separate V stack, So there's easy ways around it through composition. So I don't want you to think that like it's super limiting. It's to prevent you from creating like Swift UI's version of massive view controller. You don't create massive view, right? It forces you to kind of refactor that. So anyway, now that we put our spacer down here at the bottom, you can see our button is up higher. But we just have the default button layout, right? We don't want that. We got to make this look pretty good, right? So first thing I'm going to do is give it a frame. And the width is 280. And this is just 280 by 50 is kind of like my go-to button frame. And you can see the red outline down there of what it is. And to be honest with you, that's kind of like the typical default Apple button nowadays, right? It stretches out the screen. It's pretty thick, easy to tap. So now you can see our frame. Let's give our frame a background color. Dot background. And that's going to be color dot white. Right, there we go. So there's our button. And let's actually, I like a big bold font on my buttons. Personal preference. You don't have to do this one if you don't want to. So we'll do font. And again, we'll do dot system, hard code it. And we'll say 20 of dot bold and design.default. There you go. So nice big chunky bold font. And then the final piece of the puzzle here is rounded corners, which you can't see because of this red outline. But if I click somewhere else, right, you see it's a very blocky button. Again, I go for the default Apple look. Get a little bit of a corner radius. So the modifier for corner radius is corner radius. Dot corner radius. And real quick, it may seem like there's tons of modifiers and it's going to be impossible to memorize those. However, there's a group of them that are very, very, very common that you're going to like frame, font, background color, corner radius. You'll get very familiar with those. But, I could go through modifier by modifier, making a video for each one. I feel like that's kind of a waste of time. You'll learn and you'll pick those up over time as you use them. So let's make this corner radius 10. And if I get rid of that red square, now you can see our nice Apple default looking button. So our UI without the whole night mode stuff is done. Great. What'd you think? How'd that go? right? Not so bad. Again, I went very quick, but we're going to dive into a bunch of different apps. We're going to do this over and over again. I'm very confident you'll have the hang of the UI part at the end, because if I'm being honest, like the UI part, the HStacks, the VStacks, like that's kind of the easy and fun part of Swift UI. It's the passing the data that really trips people up. So that's what I want to focus on. But anyway, UI is done. Let's start refactoring this thing. So let's start from the top. And my big disclaimer here is Swift UI is so early. How you structure, how you refactor, how you compartmentalize your code. Like a lot of us iOS developers are still trying to figure out best practices. So I'm kind of figuring out the way I like to organize. I will, give the disclaimer that if you ask me in 2 years, I'll probably be a little different. Best practices will be established. However, I do think this initial way is a good way to start. And then hopefully you and your learnings can evolve as the Swift UI best practices evolve. You're just super early that hasn't really been established yet. So starting with the linear gradient, we're just going to create a view called background view, right? So command click, and you can see the extract subview down here. So now we just have extracted view. Let's go down to our struct here at the bottom. You see we got our extracted view that we just kind of did that. Well, I'll do the next one manually so you can see how both work. Because to be honest with you, sometimes that extract subview is a little wonky and it doesn't work all the time. So I usually end up doing it manually anyway, but I wanted to show you that. So we'll probably do the rest of them manually. But let's call this background view here. And okay, let's talk about what we want to pass in here. Because if you look at the design here, night mode has a different gradient. So we want to be able to pass in the different colors, right? So we want to pass in, blue and light blue or whatever the colors we need. So we probably need variables here, right? So var, call it top color, and that is a color that we pass in. And let's call var bottom color, and that's a color that we pass in. And then let's replace this with bottom color, top color. Top color goes first. Top color, bottom color. There you go. So now that view is refactored, and we will now replace, all that up here with, instead of extracted view, let's call it background view. And I'm going to tell you why here as soon as I'm done with this, why this is helpful and makes things more readable here. Okay, looks like I lost my autocomplete here. Let's see what's going on with background view. Okay, silly mistake here. This is the problem when you're kind of like talking while coding. So I put variables inside the variable called body. You cannot do that. So what needs to happen, as you saw that we did up here with weather day view, those variables and properties need to be on the struct itself, not in the view. So I put them in the wrong spot because I was talking and explaining, kind of half paying attention. So now if we do Command B, that should be all good down here. We still got build failed because our code is messed up at the top, but background view here is now good to go now that the properties are on the outside. Small little misstep there. So background view, that explains why I wasn't getting my initializers here. So let's try to type that again. My habit, like if I don't get the autocomplete, I don't feel good about it, right? So I like to make sure I get that autocomplete. So background view down here, and there you go, top color, bottom color. So let's pass in .blue. And pass in color with the initializer of a name called light blue. And even though this may seem like it didn't save a lot of lines of code and is very similar to what we just did, well, one, you're going to see the flexibility we introduce when we go to like night mode, but two, it just makes your screen read a lot nicer, right? Background view, top color, blue, bottom color, light blue. Cool, pretty simple. You get that. And then as you rename your other views that you refactor, your screen is going to read quite nicely. All right, let's keep it moving. Here, this text, we have our city name. So we'll copy, and then now we're gonna start doing this manually here. For now, I'm gonna put all these in the same file. I'll talk about project organization after we get it refactored and how we move stuff around. That'll come in a little bit. So let's do struct. We'll call this city text view, and it conforms to view. And then if you just type var body, you'll get the autocomplete. So body some view. There you go, that's the same structure. And now if you look here, if we want to make our city text a little bit reusable, we just need to pass in the text, right? The city name. So here, the variable on city text view can just be var city name, that is a string. And because I've already copied that text view, I can come down here, do paste, right? So instead of Cupertino, we can just do city name, and now this is reusable. So back up, and then now you're gonna start to see the readability here. So instead of just this glob of text, city, text view, and pass in the city name, and now we can do Cupertino, California. Hope I spelled that right, we'll see. Hit resume on our preview just to make sure. I always like to do it a lot, do a Command B to make sure everything is all good. and it looks like we're good. Nothing changed. But now you can see how our screen is reading a bit better. So now let's refactor out this VStack that is our main kind of weather. So again, I'm going to copy this, and down here at the bottom, we'll create another struct. Again, this is kind of probably starting to get repetitive, but you'll see that all this repetition is really going to help you learn how all this stuff works. And this is the first step of this, right? Because right now we're just refactoring out the views, but eventually when we're passing data around, we got to make sure these views have all the correct data. So I want to make sure you understand how to refactor these views before we add the more complex step to it, right? So we'll call this main weather status view. Naming's hard. If you don't like that name it whatever you like. That's fine. So here's what I like to do here. First, we'll do var body. Before I do my variables, I like to paste what I copied in there, right? I copied and pasted this, and by looking at this, I can see what variables I need, right? Like I'm going to need an image name, right? Because it's not always going to be cloud sun fill. So var image name, and that's a string. Cool. Now I can plug in image name here, and it looks like my temperature is going to be dynamic. So same thing we did up here with the weather day view. Temperature is an int, so I'm going to copy that. I mean, you could type it out if you like, but I'm going to paste that. Looks like I forgot to copy the v. All good. So var temperature is an int, and again, just like we did before, very similar. String interpolation, temperature. Cool. So again, now up here in our view, clean this up a bit. We can get rid of this VStack and just call this main weather status view. Completion here, string. We want the image name to be cloud, and I'm just looking down here to remember what it was. Cloud.sun.fill, and the temperature 76, right? And again, if it gets too long, feel free to bring your variables down like that. I like to do that. Okay, cool. So now let's make sure, do Command B. I always, again, Command B after I refactor, make sure everything's good, make sure my preview's right. Cool, again, now you're starting to see the readability. I have a Z-stack with a background view. Now I have a V-stack with the city text view, the main weather status view. A new developer coming into this screen is gonna really know what's going on based on how you structured your refactor here. Now this is where a debate could come in, and I do think you can take what I've been doing, I do think you can take that too far. So there's like a balancing act. For example, I kind of think leaving this HStack, even though it takes up a lot of code, right? Remember the goal is not to be like, let me get my content view to 3 lines of code, right? Because oftentimes getting it that short makes it a little hard to like understand. I kind of think that leaving this HStack, if we didn't have an array with our data and passing an array, that's a totally different thing. If you're familiar with Swift UI, you know what I'm talking about. But in this circumstance, I think this makes it very clear what this is on the UI, right? Because you have 5 weather day views. It's pretty straightforward what's going on here. Yes, it is an extra 10, 15 lines of code that you could refactor out. But again, getting down to 3 lines of code is not the goal. Making it easy to read and understand is the goal. So I'm gonna leave that there. I'm gonna leave this spacer here. And one thing I like to do with my buttons here, well, first get rid of the space, I don't like that. So I'm gonna refactor this text out into a button. And I do this with my buttons because again, this is like a default looking button, right? You're probably gonna use this type of button all throughout your app. So again, let's create another struct down here at the bottom. And like I mentioned, we're going to do some project organization next. These can be in separate files, but I'm putting them all here for now. So not var, struct. Let's call this weather button. And I just like to kind of put like what type of app it is. Usually it's just like SA button you may have seen in my previous videos for Sean Allen button, or GF button for GitHub followers button in my previous course. So I like to put something about the app in the beginning of it. That is a view. And again, var body, some view, you're going to type that 1,000 times. You'll be very used to that. And again, I paste in here to see what variables I need. Okay, so let's look. So I'm going to need a title, that's for sure. So var title, it's my button title, that's a string. So let's change this here to title and zoom up here. Now, I'm probably going to want to change the background color and most likely the foreground color as well. But you see, I don't have foreground color here. So let's do type foreground color. We'll just put in .blue for now. That's what it is as the default. But let's actually make these variables here. So var, let's say text color, just to make it very clear. That is going to be a color. And then background color, also a color, right? So instead of background being color.white, it's going to be background color. Nope. Kind of the perils of naming your stuff close to the default stuff here. And then text color, right? So on our weather button, we're going to pass in a title. text color, background color. That makes it so I can reuse this button in a lot of different contexts here. So again, up here, instead of this button, we're going to do weather button. And then we're going to pass in the 3 parameters, right? Title is change day time. Text color is dot blue. And background color is dot white. And again, you can leave it 1 line if you want. My text is so big here that I'll put that on 3. So again, now you can see our button, what it does. It's just going to print something for now. We're going to fix that. It's a weather button with the text, title, color, background color. So that's reusable. So that is like our very first pass at refactoring. So you can see how to extract the views into their own struct, which again, I have the whole list of them down here, right? The weather day view, the background view, city text view, weather status view. Now, when it comes to organization, I want to talk about this. I'm not actually going to create new files and move them around. But again, like this is a standalone struct as an example, weather button. Like actually, you know what? I am going to do that. I lied to you. Little ad lib on the fly. So I'm going to do Command N in the Swift weather, do a new Swift file, hit next, call this weather button. And the reason I'm doing this for weather button is because, like I said, weather button is the type of thing that you are going to use all throughout your app, right? That's very reusable. Your buttons should all look the same or similar. So that is something I want out of this file and outside of it, right? Now, if I do a Command B, well, it's going to say, oh, I didn't import Swift UI. Import Swift UI. I copied and pasted over some important stuff. And you see invalid redeclaration. That's fine. That's expected. That is because I still have it here. But once I delete that there, done. So again, on the topic of project organization, as that example, if a view that I've refactored out is going to be used all throughout the app and elsewhere, definitely I put that in its own file. However, if a view is very unique and specific to the current screen that I'm on, but I just refactored it out to make my screen more readable and easy to understand, like you see here, then I keep that in the same file, right? So you get that distinction. If it's unique to this screen, I recommend keeping it in the same file because it's easy to find, less confusing. If it's going to be used all over your app or in other screens of your app, put that off into another file. All right, so that's the refactor. In the next video, we're going to dip our toes into actually passing data. It'll be pretty simple, but you'll get to start seeing how Swift UI handles view updates based on a source of truth with data. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to the next video.